and being very clear as a coach on, well, what does free play mean to you? And what can it look like? And how can I help the players during that play element of learning?
Yeah, I think in order to answer this, you've got to look at what your children do away from your coaching sessions. Because if they don't engage in free play opportunities, which are pretty much self-initiated, it includes other children of different ages, abilities, etc., playing games that they are in control of, that they own and organize, and the adults are pretty much withdrawn from the whole situation. If you don't have those kind of criteria, then it can't really be called free play. So pickup games, street games, all the Wembley games that are played when the adults are just absent would all fit into this this category of free play. I think the magic really begins to come alive where coaches carefully plan a game or an activity where the children think that they're playing freely and the game is their own, but the coach knows that the constraints and the conditions and the little help, support and advice that they're giving them at really critical times during the game, that's when the football development is really happening. So the kids think they're playing, but the coach knows that we are really beginning to challenge their football understanding and their football knowledge.
I know when it was first talked about, I mean, teaching games for understanding isn't anything new. It's been around for certainly a lot longer than I've been on this planet. And I'm saying that to make myself feel young for a moment. But teaching games for understanding has always been out there, and it was used more, as far as I'm aware, happy to be corrected on this, probably more within physical education, and then it's been drip fed and integrated, certainly into my coaching in the last few years. There was almost a separation between teaching games for understanding and let the game be the teacher, when actually now, from a personal point of view, I see them as one and the same things, assuming that I'm setting up any game which I want to be the teacher with planned intentions of specific outcomes, whatever those constraints may be. So I'm going to try and manufacture, whilst not losing much realism, which is what I want the players to face in the game. I'm going to put some constraints, some challenges, some rules, some regulations, some parameters to lead the player to certain outcomes in the hope that they repeat it more often than they would do in a normal game, if I can use that term. And then what's crucial for me is how long you allow that period of constraint on in a typical session, because if I don't give them the time without the shackles, I'll never give them the opportunity to show me what they think, and I'll never give myself the opportunity to observe them making those decisions within realistic game conditions.
Yeah,
and that's a misconception I've noticed around teaching games for understanding. Let the game be the teacher. Well, they can be the same if your planned intentions link to your outcomes.
I think it's the level of intervention, the level of control from the coach, and the level of structure and organization that moves it down this continuum away from free play, more towards a deliberate practice and really a coach-led activity. There is absolutely a place for that kind of learning and that kind of environment. But if that's all of the children's diet, we're not embracing the real learning and development that can come through them exploring and experiment under their own devices. And I think we need to. We need it all, you know. So if we move from this into staying on the ball, and what the next layer of the DNA is, I've got to be. I want to nail this, because I've been practicing this in my head, because I've now got an opportunity. So we've asked the coaches to see possession as an individual event. Stay on the ball, build a connection with the ball, become highly technically proficient. We want that to happen because I now want to equip the players with not individual skills. I want to equip them with individual tactics. So I am now a player who can stay on the ball resist pressure, not lose the ball for our team, so I can now begin to think tactically, because my immediate opponent and the other team cannot take the ball off me. And what do I mean by individual tactics? It means I can now stay on the ball to travel into some space that I've seen that will begin to disrupt the opponents. That changes the situation that I'm in. It gives my teammates a chance to open up passing lines, get into good supporting positions, all because I can stay on the ball. And I'm so good at it, I can now think tactically. I might slow the whole game down because I'm confident in staying on the ball, because I want to attract that nearest opponent towards me. And when I attract him towards me, because I know I'm not going to lose the ball, my teammates take up great positions, open up passing lines, play in the gaps, play behind defensive lines, knowing that Pete's not going to lose the ball. So he's attracting that opponent to him for a very specific reason. So there's two examples of why, once you give your players the capability of staying on the ball, you can help them use that as a real tactic to disorganize, disrupt, and really cause problems for your opponents. But the whole thing is based upon my confidence and capability in staying on the ball. I think I would love to hear the sound of pennies dropping with all the coaches who have logged in, because looking at staying on the ball in isolation, quite rightly, you could say, Pete, I'm not sure where this is going and it's not worth investing time in. Now we begin to add the next layers on. I'm hoping we're getting a whole host of coaches saying, I see where you're going with this now. And as soon as players can stay on the ball and are not flustered by pressure from an immediate opponent, I can then begin to add more disguise to my play. I can stop and start. I can change direction. I can change speeds and tempos of my individual possession. I can speed up my passing. I can look for opponents to dribble towards and really attack. I can also look for spaces, sometimes towards my own goal, because I want to really disrupt a disorganized defense. But I can't do any of this if, as soon as pressure comes, I get panicked and I give the ball away.
So
I rest my case.
we need to make sure that as soon as the gas cooker is turned up, so to speak, that we're not folding. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned earlier, that staying on the ball is playing sideways and backwards unnecessarily.
Yeah.
It's looking to be positive, whilst accepting that in order to play forward, I might need to go sideways and backwards, which comes back to decision making. But if the players around the ball and away from the ball have got confidence in the player on the ball, they may afford him or her some time to manipulate the ball, to bring it forward themselves, or manipulate the opposition into an area where that player can free it up, which might be sideways or backwards, but the next movement is actually to play forwards quickly. Yeah, because we've drawn the opposition out on our terms, and we're playing the game on our terms.
In an ideal world, Matt, you want the ball going to a player who we've developed this capability within, and the coach is thinking, what's he going to do? Oh, I see. He's gone into that space there to draw that player there. Something's going to happen now. And his teammates are also thinking, I can see why he's going there now. And he's not immediately tried to beat somebody, but look what's happening to their defense. And there's gaps appearing. So he's completely changed the situation in the game just by being confident enough to look for other options, knowing that he's not going to lose the ball if he's under pressure while he's doing that. And this is when the whole thing about joining the dots together, just look at the capability that we are trying to develop within our youngest players. If they can begin to think not only about their individual skills, but how we can use those to individually, on a tactical level, disrupt and disorganize our opponents. Wow, we're onto something. And that's when the coaches will begin to get what they want, which is a team that is beginning to wipe the floor with every other team. That's not a guarantee, by the way, but it is what we're aiming at.
Well, but I think it's important to say we can't guarantee anything.
No.
we can only provide a toolbox with some rationale, and people on the chat have rightly said coaches have been inquisitive and said, look, where's the stats to back this up? And I see that as a positive question, because we always seek reassurance and hard evidence that what we're putting our eggs into in terms of a basket has some weight behind it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things the FA is good at is exploring and researching. But there comes a point where we have to buy into it, and the gut feeling has to talk to the head and the heart, and we follow it and we persist with it whilst being open to things that might tweak or change along the way.
Yeah. Well, in very simplistic terms, if you look at Barcelona, they may not adopt this approach exactly, but each one of their individual players has technical ability and tactical understanding of the highest level. That is developed through a very clear methodology as players move through La Masia and then into, the teams just underneath Barcelona's first team. One of their tactics is to play what they call a helping pass. So you've got players who are 5 yards apart, and you'll think, why is he passing there and getting it back? And then he's just passed it 5 yards to somebody else and got it back. What they're doing is attracting their opponents towards the ball to open up spaces and passing lines in a different area of the pitch. It's an individual tactic. So I'm passing to you, Matt, over a very short period, over a very, very short distance, because I want to attract your opponent to you because they think they've got a chance of getting the ball. And because you're passing it back to me, I want to attract my opponent closer to me. And as soon as we get that, we're going to kill them. It's an individual tactic.
And funnily enough, because I think I first came across that reading an interview with Xavi when he was coming towards the business end of his career. And he just said, we were always encouraged to pass, but pass to move the opposition. Obviously, Guardiola is very, very big on it. In the readings that I've made on Guardiola, he says a misconception is the ticky-tacky football. He says, we pass the ball to move the opposition.
It's all for a purpose. And our staying on the ball approach, partly because it really fits with where the children are at. And when they become adults and have had 10, 15 years of this kind of approach, they can play Guardiola's way. They can play Gareth Southgate's way. They can play Mauricio Pochettino's way, because whatever they ask or the coaches demand technically, they're able to do it. But we have to nail our colours to the mast in the foundation phase in order to begin the development of that kind of technical capability.
I mean, I'm just thinking about how we relate this to coaches working with young players, and things I've experimented with in the past. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't. Is, I want you to play a pass almost like you're going fishing. I want you to spot an opposition player and play the pass as if you're going to go fishing, and you're going to catch somebody out with your pass. And one of the words that you've used about 5 or 6 times in your explanations over the last 5-6 minutes, which I think dovetails nicely with space, especially when we're trying to help players understand invasion game principles, even in a 2v2, 3v3, or a small-sided game where they might be outnumbered, is spaces exist everywhere, but sometimes they're hard to see, especially for young players. But gaps, I mean, my little boy asked me just today, he said, oh, what was that over there? I said, I can't see. I just need to position myself to see through that gap. And he said to me, Daddy, what's a gap? I said, it's a space between two things. Now, in football terms, it might be between two players, or it might be between a player and the sideline. But two things that are visible and something in between makes up a gap. And if players can get quick at identifying where gaps are and where gaps could be and how they can be pulled and stretched and then exploited, that for me is a real child-friendly way of getting them tuned into these are invasion game principles, especially when you're in possession.
Yeah.
And then if we get an understanding of in possession of how to stretch and open up gaps to present, I call them playing lines. I've tried to get out of the habit of calling them passing lines, going back to your stay on the ball, master the ball, but stay on it with purpose, because you can break a line by passing it or traveling with it.
Correct.
And if I found that if I kept referring to them as passing lines, the players I was working with, their first thought was always a pass. And I was hindering the maverick and the baller, who actually, go back to what you said earlier, is the player I wanted to carry the ball, travel with it, disturb and disrupt the opposition through the way that they traveled with it.
Yeah.
So those key things for me are just little things to try and experiment with your players. So can you go fishing and pull a player out? And can you look for gaps in addition to space, because they're easier to spot?
Yeah, we want players to develop. Well, I think in the foundation phase, if you talk to the players about if you're cunning and sneaky and tricky, and what does that mean? I think we want that capability within our players to say, look, I am doing this for an ulterior motive. Oh, he's bought it. You are going to be out the game in 3, 4, 5 seconds time. And it all comes from this baseline of, actually, I'm not going to lose the ball. I'm quite confident. I am now ready for the next action. And what we want coaches to begin to understand now is those next actions can be of a very individual, tactical nature in order to disrupt and disorganize. But it all comes from a real ability to stay on the ball. Because if we try to attract and disrupt and be cunning, and yet as soon as we're under pressure, we lose the ball, the whole thing is going to fall flat anyway.
Just going to give you another chance to have a go at this challenge. 60 seconds on the clock. And when you're happy, you can share your answer on the chat this time.
Has anybody got it right?
So we've got a couple of numbers coming in. The highest we've got is 42. I think Chris originally said 50. Oh, Chris is in there with 50. The lowest we've got is 17. Last few seconds to contribute an answer. So anywhere between 17 and 50 from what I can see. The lowest is 4, unless that's a typing error, Barry, but I'm not here to judge.
Yeah, you're amongst friends.
Okay, so if technology works for me here, I'm going to share the answer with you via a visual. So give yourselves a pat on the back. I would say if you were within 10, because the first time I did it, I got 31. So I'm giving myself a pat on the back. Those that have been on a course with me just recently, I would expect you to have got it right first time. I suppose these are rhetorical questions I'm going to fire out. You had 2 attempts at it. Did you get better second time round? Which ones did you miss versus which ones did you see? When you saw it a second time round, which ones did you see that you missed first time round? Why might that be? Reasons for us doing it. 1, get you thinking, keep you engaged. Links quite nicely to coaching position. So when we're talking about looking at individuals, are we positioning ourselves as a coach appropriately to be able to appreciate the game from an individual's perspective? But above all else, that square could represent everything that's going on in the game that we as coaches want to try and see, but can't necessarily all at once, because that's a lot going on. But it's also a kind reminder, every one of those boxes, whether they're small decisions or big decisions in the context of the game, are things that might be running through a foundation phase player's mind every few seconds, that they're trying to play this game and trying to get better. And I think sometimes we've got to take a step back and appreciate what they're processing. Sometimes less is more, but if we're not aware of everything, we might not be able to help them piece the little bits together so that they're building a bigger picture of how to play this game. So that was the reason for doing it, other than for testing your mindset. So this is where we want to finish, spending a bit of time linking what the England DNA Foundation phase is outlining as key priorities and key messages, with more to come, of course, linked to what the 11v11 game looks like. And this is a graphic that I shared with Pete, working on some level 2 bite-size workshops, which are going to be released on YouTube as part of the Football Staying Home campaign. Those that are on their level 2 or have come through level 2 might be familiar with the terms on the ball, around the ball, and away from the ball. And we've just tinkered around with it, because I normally show on, around, and away. But what I want you to look at here, linked to the 40 square challenges, what do you see here? Blues in possession, what do you see? Because if I move it on and then you jump in here at any time, Pete, and then we'll interchange.
Yeah.
If we put on the ball, we've got 2 players engaged. Blue is in possession, yellow is out of possession. And it's human nature for us to fixate on the ball, because that's where the glory is. We're drawn to it like a moth to a flame, not helped by the fact that when we view games on TV, the camera can normally only spot the ball. But what's happening around and away from the ball? If we're going into this from a DNA foundation phase point of view, let's look at all the other possible 1v1 combinations to start with that you can see on there. And Pete, you highlighted a few earlier. So if I just bring them up, there's 3, for example. What would you hope that coaches can start to pick out and see from this imagery?
This is great for 2 reasons. A, it should clearly begin to illustrate how important the individual tactics are for the players and their individual ability to stay on the ball. And it's the second reason it's really good is that we've got some open age coaches who have logged in. This is absolutely for you, because you can't work effectively at 11v11 if you don't understand that the game is made up of smaller components. And if your players are not good at those smaller components, then they're never going to be truly effective as 11v11 teams. So although we've got 11 players against 11, the whole graphic is made up of 1v1 situations, 2v1 situations, 1v2 situations, 2v2 situations, and these are the building blocks that we are asking coaches to begin to prioritize as part of their foundation phase programs. And it's a great illustration of where, if we get that right and players really do understand those situations in the game, when you put all of those elements together and the game now becomes 11v11, you can now be truly effective at this format. I think in the past, we've prepared players for a game that they don't know its component parts. And it's actually really difficult to learn about those component parts when you're playing 11v11, because you just get fazed by all of the different decisions and the complexity of the game. But if you can understand how it's broken down into smaller pieces, and you are very capable in those smaller pieces, then you can fit more effectively into a larger jigsaw.
And the two things that came out for me when we discussed it was, how can the players off the ball, if the player on the ball is the maverick you want to stay on it, the competent player who can move and disrupt the opposition by attracting them, enticing them, and then moving them into areas of the field where we want to maneuver our opponent out of possession. With the ball, can the players in the blue shirts help the player on the ball stay on the ball and be the most effective ball carrier for as far as possible, whether that's they dribble from the halfway line and create a goal scoring opportunity, or they dribble 10, 20 yards and then release the ball in whatever form.
Yeah. And I see, sorry, Matt, I see coaches working with players in these smaller numbers and saying to the players off the ball, what do you think your teammate with the ball is thinking about when he's moving the defender this way? What cues or signals is he giving you without actually saying anything to you? What is he asking you to prepare for, to think about, or to be ready for when he does this? Whereas if it's just, we know he's going to pass it simple or pass it back or boot the ball out, you haven't even got time to think about what your options are, because you know the decision is going to be a very simple one. But yeah, I see this is the richness of coaching, and it's almost the intrigue in the game, because we're unpicking its parts to put all those parts back together, but to be so much more effective as a result of taking it apart and then putting it back together.
The other thing that came to mind for me, highlighting the 3 1v1s off the ball from a blue perspective, so in possession, was could the blue players position themselves so that when they receive the ball, they can execute whatever their individual tactic is in their 1v1. Exactly. So, for example, you might have one player who's happy to receive and pin the opposition player and roll on their first touch. Yeah. You might have another player who's happy to drop deeper, receive, engage the 1v1, draw them in and accelerate. So different ways. And I think you highlighted a number of different ways of being able to dominate in a 1v1, 1v2, 2v3 situation. And if we move that on, because the picture starts to unravel, we've started to highlight, again, these are just two examples. You can pick out some of your own. And that's why I go back to that square challenge. What are you seeing here? Highlighting the fact that you've got 2 2v1s highlighted, one for the team in possession should the ball be freed up, but also for the yellow team should they manage to tackle or intercept the ball in the 1v1 in the middle of the pitch. There's a 2v1 ahead if that yellow who's in the middle red dot intercepts off the blue with the ball, who can then free it up to 2 teammates ahead of him, and there's a momentary 2v1 in that situation as highlighted in the yellow circle. So going back to the question of what do you see, that's what I was seeing around possibilities, looking at the team in possession, out of possession. Pete, what did you want to highlight around 2v1s and underloads and overloads linked to the DNA?
I'm gonna mention individual possession again. So I'm really sorry for this, but I've got to get this out, and I keep trying to think of ways to explain it. And if you imagine you're in the Olympics, you're in the 4x400 sprint relay final, and you can't rely on somebody to not drop the baton. It's a bit like playing football and saying, well, if you pass the ball to him, as soon as he's under any kind of pressure, he's going to drop the baton. So we're never going to win the race, because he can't pass it on to the next person, who then does his leg of the run. So if you imagine each individual chain of our football team, whatever format we play, as somebody in a relay who holds the baton, you will never win the race if you're the player who constantly drops the baton. So if you're the player who is the weakest link because of your technical ability or your tactical understanding, you are never going to be a team that can really go on and dominate. And that's what we want, as well as providing a recreational platform that is really enjoyable, where every child is feeling that they are able to get better. And
I know that you're working away on adding to this next bit of the England DNA, and we touched upon it briefly, so you may only want to share certain detail because I'm not too aware of what stage it's at yet. But in terms of homing in on 2v1s and what the possibilities are, because you mentioned earlier about the possibilities are, when we say endless, they're plentiful in the way that this invasion game can be played, even in the smaller numbers of a 2v1. What are some of the ways and the possibilities that you would want coaches to plant seeds in players' minds of exploring and making the most of a 2v1 situation, for example?
Yeah. Well, earlier you asked about where did the plank come from, and I mentioned the balloon mayhem game. We've got a practice that's called 2v1 bingo. And what it is, you set up a 2v1 game and give the ball to the two players and say that we want you to keep the ball as a two or as an individual within that two. And I've got 10 things on this sheet of paper that are 10 different ways for you to keep the ball and keep possession within when you've got two players against one. So you're going to play for 10 minutes and I'm going to see how many I can cross off. And if I get all 10, I'm obviously going to shout bingo. And what we've got probably one or two ways with foundation phase players where they look to keep the ball in a 2v1. So there's 8 other ways that they can keep it that are not even on the radar. So the 2 that they go for is dribbling as a way to keep the ball. And then they end up dribbling out of the area, losing it to their opponent or not passing it at the right time. Or they just tried a passing and moving game that will break down because they're not taking care of the passes. They're not smoothing the pass out and they're causing problems for their partner with the pass that they give. They're the 2 ways that foundation phase players tend to play in a 2v1. There are so many others. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but they will come out when we introduce this game into the DNA practical activities.
What's the line? Always leave the audience wanting more.
Yeah, just keep thinking 2v1 bingo. Coaches can have a go and think about, well, how can you be successful in a 2v1 where 2 of our players are against one opponent? How can we keep the ball for as long as possible? If you jot down all the different ways, you can create your own 2v1 bingo. And the kids love it.
And I look back at that imagery and I think to myself, that's a still image. Obviously, when the ball's moving and you've got 22 players in this case moving around, it's difficult to observe.
Yeah.
And that's why I want to go back to that. How many squares did you see? If you didn't see all 40, well, give yourselves a break because you're almost not supposed to. If you're only seeing 20 of those squares, but you can see those 20 squares with real clarity, that's a good place to be in. That said, there are other options to explore, other things you as a coach needs to see. So imagine this particular graphic moving around, but I almost want to bring it right back down and strip it to the 1v1, 2v1s, 2v2s, 3v2s, 3v3s, and say, look at how many opportunities, even with a small group of players that you've got, of embedding foundation phase principles of stay on the ball, master the ball, excite with the ball, seek creative solutions, connect and combine, because you can achieve all of those things to a real high level of competency if you're persistent as a coach and you're open-minded and you're reflective and you're interactive with your players to really prepare them for the 11v11 game. But it won't happen overnight. No.
This is a long-term process, but that's why they call it long-term athlete or player development. And I think we're in the business of planting trees that, to quote it, we will never sit in the shade of, because we're preparing kids for a future that, we have no idea what it might be. So let's keep our options as wide open as possible so that whatever happens, we've at least tried to prepare the children in the best possible way.